This racist woman thought she could bully her new neighbor into leaving, so she sent fake HOA police to have him arrested. But she had no idea who she was messing with. And when she found out, it was too late. Linda had always considered herself the unspoken ruler of the community. In her mind, she decided who belonged and who didn't. Living in a wealthy, gated neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia, she prided herself on maintaining order. She attended every HOA meeting, filed endless complaints, and made sure that everything in her surroundings met her personal standards. So, when a new neighbor moved in next door, she was immediately on high alert. At first, she only noticed little details: the sleek black SUV pulling into the driveway, the polished way he dressed, the expensive-looking watch on his wrist. But then, she saw something that made her blood boil. He was black. A successful black man in her community? Unacceptable. Her mind immediately jumped to assumptions. He had to be a drug dealer, a scammer, or worse. No one she knew had ever seen him at HOA meetings, community events, or neighborhood gatherings. He didn't introduce himself to anyone. To Linda, that wasn't just suspicious, it was threatening. Determined to get rid of him, she started nitpicking at every possible issue. First, it was his trash cans. She claimed he left them out too long, even though pickup had happened just hours before. Then, she complained about his driveway, insisting it was too cluttered because he had visitors. She reported him to the HOA, but when the board reviewed the complaints, they found no violations. That only made her more frustrated. Her attempts to turn the neighborhood against him were met with mixed reactions. Some residents ignored her, while others subtly agreed but didn't want to get involved. That wasn't enough for Linda. She needed action. One afternoon, she saw him outside, quietly enjoying his coffee on the porch. She stormed over, demanding to know who he was and what he did for a living. He calmly replied, "I work in federal law enforcement," and left it at that. That answer wasn't good enough for her. He was hiding something, she just knew it. Linda took it a step further. She started a petition to have him investigated. She approached neighbors, telling them he was a danger to the community. Most refused to sign, but she didn't care. She was determined to make his life miserable. When her complaints didn't work, she got creative. She called the HOA again, this time claiming he had illegal tenants in his house. When that failed, she insisted his car was parked illegally. Still, nothing happened. Outraged, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She contacted two men who worked for a shady private security firm. She gave them a clear mission: dress up as HOA officials, show up at his door, and intimidate him into leaving. They agreed, promising to handle it for a price. Watching from her window, Linda smiled as the fake officers knocked on his door. She thought she had finally won. She had no idea her world was about to come crashing down. Derrick heard the knock at his door. It was firm, aggressive, nothing like the usual friendly visits from delivery drivers or neighbors. He set his coffee down, straightened his posture, and walked toward the door. As he opened it, two men stood before him, wearing crisp white shirts with badges clipped onto their chests. Their posture was stiff, their expression serious. "Sir, we're with the HOA enforcement team," the taller one announced, his voice carrying an authoritative edge. "We've received multiple complaints about violations on this property, and we're here to issue a final warning." Derrick didn't flinch. He looked them over carefully, noticing small details. Their badges were generic, not official HOA credentials. Their uniforms looked too polished, like they had been put together for effect rather than function. And the way they spoke, it wasn't procedural, it was rehearsed. Something wasn't right. He crossed his arms. "What violations are you referring to?" The shorter man stepped forward, pulling out a clipboard. "Unauthorized tenants. Improper parking. Failure to comply with community standards." Derrick raised an eyebrow. "I live here alone." My car is parked in my own driveway. And community standard? That's vague. Show me the written citations. The taller man hesitated. He exchanged a glance with his partner, as if trying to gauge their next move. We don't have them with us, he admitted. But we've been authorized to enforce immediate compliance. Derrick let the silence hang for a moment. He could feel the weight of their discomfort. These weren't trained professionals. They were playing a role, hoping intimidation would do the job. Linda, watching from her porch, leaned forward eagerly. She expected Derrick to panic, to argue, to react in a way that would justify further action. But he didn't. He remained calm, analyzing the situation with an unreadable expression. I'd like to see some ID, he finally said. The shorter man straightened his posture. You don't need to see our IDs. We're acting under the authority of the Homeowners Association. Derrick gave a slow nod. He had dealt with people like this before, people who relied on power they didn't actually have. He pulled out his phone. Hold on. I just need to make a quick call. Linda's smirk widened. She assumed he was calling a friend or a lawyer, someone who would stall the situation, but ultimately do nothing. Derrick dialed a number and held the phone to his ear. Yeah, I need a verification check on 2 individuals impersonating enforcement officers. Suspected fraud and harassment. The 2 men stiffened. The shorter one took half a step back. Sir, the taller one began, but Derrick raised a hand, cutting him off. Stay right where you are. You're about to meet some real law enforcement. Linda's smile faded. The men who thought they were in control suddenly looked uncertain. None of them realized just how badly their plan had backfired. The 2 fake officers exchanged nervous glances as Derrick remained unfazed. He had seen this type of situation play out before, bullies who thought authority was just about looking the part. But now, they were in over their heads. Within minutes, the sound of approaching sirens shattered the quiet afternoon. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the windows of the pristine houses lining the street. A convoy of unmarked black SUVs rolled up, followed by 2 marked police cruisers. The fake officers stiffened. The taller one instinctively reached for his pocket, but quickly thought better of it. The shorter one swallowed hard, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Derrick stepped aside as the first agent exited an SUV. The man, dressed in a dark suit, scanned the situation with a practiced eye before approaching. Director Williams, he greeted, his tone professional yet firm. We received your call. Linda, who had been watching from a distance, suddenly felt her stomach drop. Director? The word rang in her ears. She had spent weeks assuming Derrick was some lowlife who had no business living in her neighborhood. But now, standing at his doorstep, was a team of real federal agents, people who clearly took his authority seriously. The lead agent turned toward the 2 impostors. Names? He asked, his voice sharp. The taller one hesitated before mumbling. Jason Miller. The shorter man barely managed a whisper. Keith Randall. The agent's expression didn't change. You realize impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime, correct? Linda's breath hitched. She had orchestrated this entire thing, convinced she could scare Derrick into leaving. But now, she was watching the exact opposite unfold. One of the uniformed officers stepped forward. We'll need to see identification from both of you. Jason reached into his pocket with trembling fingers and produced a flimsy ID badge. Keith did the same. The officer took one look at them before shaking his head. These aren't real. You both need to turn around and place your hands behind your backs. Keith immediately protested. We were just following orders. He caught himself mid-sentence, glancing toward Linda. Derrick finally spoke. Following orders? From who? Keith clamped his mouth shut, but Jason cracked. His eyes darted to Linda, who was now frozen on her porch. The agent noticed. He turned, stepping off Derrick's porch and toward Linda's yard. "Ma'am," he called, "I think we need to have a word." Linda's face drained of color. She had spent her life wielding power over her neighbors, but for the first time, she realized she had no control over what came next. Derrick stood in his doorway, arms crossed, watching as the plan meant to drive him out had unraveled completely. Linda had underestimated him, and now she was about to face the consequences. The officers secured Jason and Keith in handcuffs, reading them their rights as they were escorted toward the police cruisers. Neither man resisted. There was no way out. The reality of their situation had sunk in. Linda remained rooted in place, her mind racing for an excuse, a justification, anything to distance herself from the mess she had created. But it was too late. The lead agent approached her, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us for questioning." She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. She had spent weeks treating Derrick like an outsider, convinced she could manipulate the system to push him out. Now, she was the one being investigated. Derrick watched as the once confident woman hesitated before following the agents. He didn't need revenge. Justice had handled itself. The same arrogance that led Linda to orchestrate this scheme had been her downfall. As the last cruiser pulled away, the neighborhood fell silent again. Derrick exhaled, stepping back inside his home. He had no plans of leaving. This was his house, his neighborhood, and no amount of prejudice would change that. The game Linda played had ended, and she had lost. Some people learn the hard way. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more.